Welcome to River City Plus, the show after the show, and I have Alan Bliss from the Jacksonville History Center here to continue our deep dive conversation over about women who made a significant in Jacksonville's history because it is International Women's Month. So thanks for staying a little longer to get into that conversation.
Always happy to be here and appreciate the invitation. And yeah, National Women's History Month has been a thing since 1987. And every place in the United States has a story of women who have made a difference there, and Jacksonville really has it in a rich field.
So you picked three women of significance. I was like, hey, it's internet, or is it just national? All right, we're gonna go with National Women's Month, and I was just like, we're focused on women, and he came up with three women that, in our just brief conversation, actually hit on some very deep, meaningful points on how they affected Jacksonville's history. So, one we did not get to do from the show. Let's start with her, and that's Viola Muse. Isn't that one we missed?
That's right. Viola Muse. What a beautiful name, right? And the photos that we have of her show a woman of beauty and dignity as well. It's a good compliment to the name. Viola Muse was born in Alabama, and she received an education, a college education, at Indiana University. That kind of set her apart from women of the era, and especially from black women of the era, right? And after finishing her college degree, she married a man from Jacksonville named John Muse and moved here and took up residence for the rest of her life. She started working as a hairdresser here in the 1920s. She and her husband also developed a line of hair care products and beauty products. She became an activist in the community, and during the toughest years of the Great Depression, the 1930s in Jacksonville, Ms. Muse became associated with the Federal Writers Project, which was an initiative of the Works Progress Administration, Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal interventions to try to find ways that people could sustain themselves, their families, and their homes. And Ms. Muse here in Jacksonville went to work doing interviews and doing research and writing about the lives of Jacksonville's black people. She did in depth research into the day to day lives of people just living their experience here in Jacksonville. And she did this as sort of a commissioned series of research projects. She took field notes, but Ranch, things were so difficult then that the resources you didn't there was no such thing as having portable recorders or dictating machines or cell phones to take pictures. She wrote notes on the backs of file folders, on scraps of newspaper, on whatever resources that she had available. And a lot of that material is preserved and it exists at the Jacksonville History Center today, along with the typescripts of the research information that she found and artifacts that she collected from her visits to people in their homes, their churches, their schools, and at their workplaces. She did this for about 3 years in the late 1930s and returned to her work after the end of the Federal Writers Project, which wrapped up its work in 1939 as the economy began to recover. And she really was sort of, I think, lost to history for many years. And it was only in recent years that at the Jacksonville History Center we discovered this collection of papers that had been donated almost at the very end of her life back in the 1980s. With the help of the University of North Florida, we have created the Viola Muse Digital Editions, an online project that your viewers can go to. There is a link to it at our website. And there is a wealth of information about this woman. But think about it. She visited people. She was a keen observer, and she looked at people in their day-to-day lives, and she wrote down the notes of the things that she observed. And looking at that now is like looking through a telescope at the past, and it gives us this really unvarnished, unfiltered, uh, just very authentic and credible and realistic look at the lives of people, especially people of color in Jacksonville during the worst years of the Great Depression. That was a time when so many people were experiencing difficulties. Ms. Muse lived a long life. She died here in Jacksonville. I think the year was 1981 when she passed away. But as your viewers can see from the photograph, even in her advancing years, she was a woman of beauty and dignity and a remarkable character and had a remarkable life. And we're so lucky to be able to get a glimpse of her and get a glimpse of the work that she did. And she continues to reach out from the past, and the work that she did then really is even more valuable than ever and keeps becoming more valuable because of the way that it gives us a look around the corner and into the past.
See, history is real. You cannot varnish over that, all of that knowledge that people are totally missing. Especially, history is our foundation that we grow from. So another woman we spoke about was Mother Kofi, Laura Adorkor.
Yes, Laura Adorkor Kofi, sometimes known as Princess Kofi or Mother Kofi, Kofi. Uh, Mother Kofi, as I generally call her, was born, as near as we can determine, in Ghana, and she was part of a royal family, ergo the name, the title Princess, which appears to be an authentic reflection of her family background. She emigrated to the Americas across the Atlantic Ocean, and we believe she first emigrated to Panama in Central America. After a number of years there, she emigrated to the United States. It's unclear where she entered the U.S., but she eventually wound up living here in Jacksonville. As a member of African royalty, she became associated with the very popular movement called Garveyism, founded by Marcus Garvey, a charismatic and influential black leader of the 19 teens and the 1920s. And Marcus Garvey's story is a fascinating one in its own right, but he's a guy, and this is Women's Month, so we're not going to get into him right now. But Mother Kofi associated herself with the Garvey movement. His organization was called the UNIA, Universal Negro Improvement Association. Mr. Garvey's argument was that the struggle for equality and social justice for blacks in the United States and in Western democracies like this, he said, is useless. He said, let's not bother with that. That's a waste of time. Let's establish our own economy, our own structure of businesses, our own society, and let's demonstrate by our independence and our thriving success that we are equal, in fact, and we don't need anybody to open the gate and let us in. We're here. And Mother Kofi embraced that. Marcus Garvey spread that message with the fervor of an evangelist. And he was this animated, as I said, really charismatic speaker, and so was Mother Kofi. And if you know anything about the dynamics of social movements, when they are founded by a charismatic leader, they don't take very kindly to competition. And Marcus Garvey, like many charismatic men of his era, particularly did not welcome a challenger competition from a woman. So Mother Kofi was actually working from a position of some, I guess, impairment, some challenge to her own credibility. But as she became more popular and really became welcomed by large audiences and spoke more widely and attracted big crowds, Marcus Garvey became challenged by her and eventually thought that he was going to lose control of his own movement. And he began to criticize her and eventually denounced her and said, this woman does not speak for me, and we should excommunicate her from the movement. She really has no role in the UNIA. And apparently some of his followers took that message a little bit too seriously. She was speaking to a large audience at a convention venue in Miami in February of 1928 when two men in the audience drew weapons and shot her dead on the spot on the stage. They were later determined to have been close followers of Mr. Garvey. So obviously they got the connection. The crowd in the audience turned on the assassins and beat one of them to death on the spot. Two others were captured, but they were eventually acquitted of any charges of murder. Mother Kofi's body traveled by rail car back here to Jacksonville, where she had made her home, and at frequent stops along the route, her coffin was visited by thousands of people who admired her and lamented her passing. When she returned to Jacksonville, a memorial service took place, and she was interred at the Old City Cemetery on the north side of Jacksonville, northeast side, just a few blocks across the river from where we are here at your studios today. And if you visit the Old City Cemetery, you'll find there is only one mausoleum in the cemetery, and that's Mother Kofi. You can walk up to the mausoleum. I've taken groups, visitors, Duval County school students, and other groups to the city cemetery because it's a fascinating place in its own right. But Mother Kofi's tomb is a remarkable example of the way that she was venerated. And there continues to be an observance and a commemoration of her life there every year, attended by people who are part of the churches that she was associated with in her lifetime. This is a woman who, in her death, demonstrated the challenges that women, set aside any conversation of race, even though she was black, but it demonstrates the challenges of women, I think, trying to assert their voice, assert their message, help find a way for people to assert themselves, and that really resonated with people in the day. And it resonates right down to the present, does it not?
Oh, for sure, for sure. And one more that we want to touch on. I mean, like, now I'm gonna have to go check out that cemetery, but just so many nuggets. But our final is Grace Trout Wilbur.
Grace Wilbur Trout. So, Ms. Trout was a white woman. She was born in Iowa, and she eventually married a hardware wholesaler named George Trout. They moved to Chicago, and she lived there from the late 1800s until 1920. And during her years in Chicago, she became an advocate for the women's right to vote. She was a pioneering suffragist. She was one of the leaders of the Illinois Women's Suffrage Association, and Illinois was one of the early states that granted the right to women to vote, even before the national amendment extending that to women nationwide was passed and ratified. She was an influential leader in the national movement advocating for women's suffrage. And finally, when women did receive the vote in 1920 with the passage of that constitutional amendment, she and her other leaders from the national organization founded what is now known as the League of Women Voters. And that continues to exist today, and she was one of the charter leaders of that organization. Well, with the passage of the suffrage amendment and the creation of the League, she and her husband appear to have decided that their work in Chicago was done, and she already had a Jacksonville connection because she and her husband, Mr. Trout, had bought the family home of a cousin, a woman named Eliza Souvier, and that home was on the south bank of the St. Johns River, literally just a few blocks from where we are here now. It had the name Maribyrnong, and it still exists. It stands today in the Empire Point neighborhood. And she lived there for the rest of her long years. She died here in Jacksonville in 1956, and she is buried in Evergreen Cemetery along with her late husband and her children and other extended family relatives. You can visit her gravesite, and it's a fascinating example of how much you learn about a person by visiting their grave. Now, when she moved to Jacksonville, she didn't take her foot off the gas. She became, as you might expect, involved in civic affairs. She was a club woman. She joined the Garden Club. She became acquainted with other influential women. And in the 1920s, women, even though they had received the right to vote, still did not really swing a lot of weight in civic affairs. But she became involved in advocating for city planning. Having lived in Chicago, she knew something about that. Chicago was a pioneering example of a city that adopted planning. So she thought, well, Jacksonville needs that too. She couldn't just snap her fingers and make it happen, but her fine political skills came through in what she did in Jacksonville. She became acquainted with other influential women like Nina Cummer, and also Mrs. John Alsop, the wife of the then mayor of Jacksonville, and others. And between them, they formed a city planning committee of women, and realizing that they needed the influence of male elected officials to effectuate this, she said, well, let's ask the men to advise us about how to do this. So she created a men's advisory council to the women. Well, you're a guy, I'm a guy. We know what happens when women say, oh, would you advise me about how to do what it is that I need? And of course, the next thing you know, men found themselves just doing what the women wanted them to do. And indeed, Jacksonville was the first city in the state of Florida to adopt a comprehensive municipal plan that was authored in 1929 by a pioneering city planner. And guess who wound up chairing the Planning Commission for much of the following 20 years? Mrs. Grace Wilbur Trout.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. And people were like, "Oh, Jacksonville history." There is so much, and most people are thinking like, when the Spanish were here or any of that kind of stuff. But from our history after the Great Fire and how we've progressed since then, and even more, you can find it all out at the Jacksonville History Center, and you can go to their website, jackshistory.org. That's how you can find out where the museum's open. If you want to make some inquirements about maybe taking some tours and stuff, this is the man that's going to do that for you. So thanks for that information. Mind blown. Mind blown.
Jacksonville history matters.
It does. It does. All right. So we're going to take it off and move on. So thank you for hanging out with us. And thank you for that information. I hope you guys took a little bit from that. Maybe sprinkle that on the kids and let them know that your history is all our history. So we will be back tomorrow with more River City Plus, and tomorrow at 9:30 for more River City Live.